You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. Once again, thank you for joining us as you do each and every week. We certainly appreciate you guys being part of the Hazard Ground community. Speaking of the Hazard Ground community, I want to remind you guys, make sure you follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Keep up with the show, see preview of next week's guests, and all the information that we have going on. And of course, all the great sponsors that we're working with, including Cabela's, this week's sponsor. The world's foremost outfitter of hunting, fishing, and outdoor gear, Cabela's provides everyone from the expert hunter and angler to the family looking to get away for a weekend camping trip with the right gear at the best prices. So if you're looking to outfit your next big adventure or just looking for some great gear to use around the house or the cabin, go to our sponsors page, hazardground.com/sponsors. That's hazardground.com/sponsors, and click on the Cabela's banner. You have to go through our sponsors page if you want to help out the show and make the most of your next outdoor adventure. Also continuing to run our promotion with Amazon. Use the Amazon link on our homepage, hazardground.com. Do all of your Amazon shopping. It costs you nothing. We'll donate a portion of the proceeds to the amazing veteran organizations that are featured on the show. So as you guys get ready for the holiday season and you're going to Amazon, go to hazardground.com first, click on the Amazon banner, and you'll be supporting veterans organizations everywhere. We certainly appreciate you guys doing that. Now on to this week's episode, and a timely one at that, with Veterans Day coming up. This week's guest is a former Marine corporal who spent time in the Panama invasion and Desert Shield, Desert Storm. He currently is the executive director of the United War Veterans Council, which hosts the New York City Veterans Day Parade every single year. He is Mark Otto on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Mark, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Mark. It's an honor.
All right, well, look, there's a lot to unpack here, and the New York City Veterans Day Parade, a huge event every year, and certainly thank you for taking the time to help put that on in one of the biggest cities in the country, and obviously, after 9/11, New York City, a very, sensitive place and very special place for veterans, so we'll get to all that coming up, but let's start all the way back at the beginning and why you joined the Marine Corps.
Yeah, so my background, I'm fifth of my family to actually serve in war. My grandfather and my great uncle in World War II in Europe. My dad and my uncle were both in Vietnam, did multiple tours. They were all in the Army, so I was the first Marine to join. But I always wanted to serve ever since I was a little kid, so it was just sort of like a fate that it was going to happen.
Now, did you sign up right out of high school?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so
delayed entry also.
Really? So you were 17 or whatever?
Yep.
Did your family, when you made that decision, did the family, your family have any reservations about it or anything like that?
Yeah, so my parents definitely were quite alarmed by it. My mom is Vietnamese. My dad met her during the war. They had my sister in Vietnam. They were separated during the Tet Offensive, and by some miracle, my dad was able to actually find my mom. They've been married for 51 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a whole story in itself. So they definitely had some reservations because they saw some of the ugliness of what went down in Vietnam. I think they pretty much lived watching the TV during CNN's 24-hour broadcast of Desert Storm.
That is amazing. I mean, I want to go back to your parents. We've chronicled the Tet Offensive through several different guests here on the Hazard Ground, and that is an unreal story. Can you kind of encapsulate it real quick? If you have a synopsis of it.
Absolutely. So, my dad wasn't a gunslinger. My dad was in logistics. He always says that he had an easy job compared to the grunts that were out there fighting the battles. However, war sort of came to their footsteps when my dad was home on leave. After his second tour and he was signing up for his third. My dad's one of 12 Irish-German family growing up on in Greenwich Village of New York City on Thompson Street between Houston and Prince. And they were a close-knit family. So my dad was home and the Tet Offensive goes down. So my mom and my dad had an apartment in Long Binh outside of Saigon, outside of the base perimeters. My dad canceled his leave, rushed back to find my mom. His family was like, you don't even know she's alive. Everyone's getting murdered and killed in the streets over there. And he said, how could I live with myself if I didn't go back right now to find out what happened?
Seriously.
My mom had my sister at the time there, and she was pregnant with me. My dad gets back to Saigon Airport, and he gets picked up by a couple of GIs in a Jeep. They're heading back to the base. And at the same time, there's still chaos and pandemonium going on. And apparently, the Viet Cong blew up an ammo depot. So the concussion from that blast was felt across the area. My dad was stuck in a convoy in a Jeep, and the 5-ton troop carrier driver behind them panicked when that concussion blast hit them and hit the gas and ran right into the back of their Jeep. My dad woke up in a field hospital, and he wasn't certain what happened to the other 2 guys that were in the Jeep. But a colonel was walking down the row handing out Purple Hearts. And my dad looked up and just said to him, "I don't deserve a Purple Heart. I was in a car accident," because he had no idea what actually happened. He didn't find that out till later. So my dad gets up, doesn't even check out of the hospital, starts walking towards this farmer's market where my mom's family was selling produce. So at that point, he knew that she wouldn't be at the restaurant. She'd probably be in hiding somewhere. And by a miracle, he runs into my grandfather at that farmer's market, and he had to take off his headdress. His head was all banged up from bleeding from the
explosion.
accident.
Yeah.
So he had to take off the bandages so my grandfather would actually recognize him. But yes, so fortunately, it was a miracle that he did find my grandfather, because my mom was in hiding at my aunt's house, and my dad had never actually been there, so they probably would never have reconnected. So it was sort of fate. But yeah, it's 51 years later, and they're still happily married. I have a sister, and the family's doing good.
Talk about the grace of God. That is unreal.
Yeah.
Like, you can't make that kind of story up. Like, that is, whew, man.
Yeah, I was still my dad. He's the hero of the family.
Yeah. I mean, wow. I haven't heard anything like that. We've heard a lot of crazy stories. Like, that really is near the top of the list. We have to get your dad on now to tell that whole story and the intricacies of that. That is amazing. All right. So obviously your parents had some reservations about you signing up for the Marines and going into the service, but you got in at a time of peace. So was it really just a concern that you would ever end up in war?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. At the time that I signed up, it was peacetime. So it was a different type of military. The country is in a different place at that point in time too. So I went in just, doing my patriotic duty and wanting to follow the footsteps of those who came before me. My dad had reservations, but at the time that I signed up, he felt pretty good that, things weren't going to happen the way they unfolded in the next 4 years. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's odd because it really was, it was, so you got it in 88, but it was peacetime. And then all of a sudden you had these little skirmishes and the Gulf War breaks out. It was nothing really that was really United States focused. It's just, we ended up getting involved in things. You can make the argument we didn't need to get involved in, but that's neither here nor there, but we end up doing it. So you get in, you go through all your basic and everything else. Just as far as basic and your follow-on training, was it everything you thought it was going to be? Any surprises?
I guess there's a few, twists and turns in everyone's 4-year commitment to the military. So I went through Paris Island. I was a 3rd Battalion. I got stationed on Camp Lejeune. I was at 8th Com Battalion first. I took the indoctrination test and got into 2nd Force Reconnaissance Company. I was stationed in the comm shop there for a couple of months. And at the same time, the Marine Corps itself was going through changes. They actually stood up what was called the 2nd Surveillance, Reconnaissance, and Intelligence Group. They did one, SHRIGs is what they were referred to on each one of the divisions. It was their first sort of effort to take all of the intelligence gathering assets and special operations type units and put them under one umbrella. So prior to that, the Marine Corps was very infantry orientated. They didn't like anything with the word special in front of it. So at that same point in time, they sort of rearranged the furniture, and they were pulling people from different units to patch up and build up other units. I was then sent over to intelligence company. I was still only a PFC at the time, so I really, was still in the learning phase. When I got to Intel company, they were revamping this unit that deployed motion sensors to track enemy movement. So they had some sort of claim to fame in Vietnam, as they actually had them on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they gathered some great intelligence on enemy movements there. However, they gone sort of dormant over time, and they were sort of misused over time. So at that point in time, they pulled in my warrant officer, Duke Colvin. Duke was his nickname, and he came from JSOC, and he was supposed to be en route to 2nd Force, and they rerouted him to this intel company to take over the platoon. So he then requested people from 2nd Force and other areas to come in and sort of act as cadre for training and revamp this unit. So I was actually I was the lowest ranking person that was yanked and sent over there as a PFC. There was about about 4 or 5 sergeants that came over as well. Through him, we ended up getting a lot of training that otherwise we would not have gotten. We all got airborne qualified through Benning. Some of us went through SEER school, and including myself on Bragg. So he really upped the level of training and re-gutted the unit and redid it. And because of that, aside from the Panama invasion and Desert Storm, we actually got missions with Joint Task Force 6, which was counter-narcotics operations on the border of Mexico.
Wow.
So that was really colorful as well. Really interesting work. Using motion sensors, you can be very creative in how to use them to track people in all ways, shapes, and forms. So down on the border, well, you see nowadays, they're doing all sorts of things. But back then, we could cover a 20-mile radius with sensor fields. And we worked with federal law enforcement as reactionary forces as well.
You went to SEER school. Now, for those who don't know, who are non-military listening, SEER, S-E-R-E, Survive, Evade, Resist, and Escape. That's I wish that's like the one school I wish I could have gone to. Like, I would go to that school now if they offered it to me. I think that's the coolest course that the military offers.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing school. You learn a lot about yourself. So
yeah.
The funny thing was, I got home from Benning on a Friday to Camp Lejeune. And I walk in and check into my CO's office, and Duke Colvin's sitting there going, Otto and my friend Kaufman that was with me, he goes, "You two idiots are the only one that put in for SF SEER school on Bragg." He's like, "Everything you need is what you brought to jump school with you. Just drive across to Bragg and your school starts on Monday. I'll see you in 3 weeks." So we got across there, and we really had no idea what we were getting into. But the funniest claim to fame, because I wasn't one of these guys that had like 1,500 jumps, but my one claim to fame is we went from jumping out of C-141 Star lifters and C-130s on a drop zone the shape of like New Jersey down at Fort Benning to jumping into Camp McCall, which is basically like jumping into your backyard. That was my first jump out of jump school, was jumping into SEER school. And the funniest thing was we got our briefing, and they're like, "Y'all are Marines. You don't have to be jumping out of these planes. We'll just insert you, and you'll meet up with the team, and you'll take off." And we're like, "We're Marines. We barely ever get to jump. Hell yeah, we want to jump." So we're all excited. We get out to the drop zone, and you have to remember, I was jumping out of these giant cargo planes. We get to the drop zone. There's this tiny little civilian planes, and they're like, "Well, here's your brief. Only 4 of you are going to fit in this thing sitting down." And the plane's going to go vertical and drop the tailgate, and you're all going to get freaking pooped out.
Wow. That's incredible.
So my friend and I look at each other like, all right, well, now we're stuck because we're the only Marines here in this course, and we're going to look like knuckleheads if we back out now. So we're like, all right, here we go. So, of course, we jumped. It was sort of gusty wind day, tiny drop zone. The one thing I always heard about that you never want to happen is to go through a tree. Of course, I went right through a tree.
Nice.
And covered my face and made myself like a knife going through the tree. Felt all the branches brush against me, and then by some miracle, I stopped like 6 inches off the ground.
Wow.
and I open my eyes. I'm like feeling my arms and legs. Like, holy crap! I don't have a freaking scratch on me. And I hit my releases, and I literally walk out of my chute. And that's when the fun began, because I heard the dogs barking.
That is great. That is outstanding.
But it was a pretty awesome course. The course was started by 2 Green Berets that were captured for 5 years. Nick Rowe ended up writing a book called 5 Years to Freedom. It's a great read. If you have a chance, you should read it. Dan Pritzer was actually still there as a civilian advisor teaching the course. He was the Army medic. So it was a really great course.
I know a couple of guys who went through it. They told me some stories from it. I think you encapsulated it best by saying you'll learn a lot about yourself. Whereas, Navy SEAL buds or, Special Forces Assessment Selection, that's a whole different animal. Anybody can go to SEER school and with the concept of, hey, look, you're captured, right? And this is how you're going to literally get out of this and survive. It's not necessarily challenging you physically the way some like buds would or assessment and selection would, things of that nature, but it's certainly pushing you to limits you didn't know you had.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're out there with the 50-pound sandbag, and they weigh it at the checkpoint, so don't think you're going to get shifty and try and empty out some of the sand and put it back. because if your sandbag doesn't weigh 50 pounds, you get a coupon or you can fail the course. So coupons are usually weird, awkward things to carry that are heavy, and you'll be carrying that for the rest of the course to make good on having a lighter bag at the checkpoint. So, that's always a factor. One of the funniest things that happened to us out there, it was a slightly illuminated night. We're walking across this cow patty, and it's all farms around the surrounding area. And one of my guys goes to me, hey, there's 5 of us out there. They're like, I wonder how they separate like the bulls from the cows. And all of a sudden we just hear this noise of like, and we see this gigantic thing running down the fence line at us. So we all haul ass forward. And because of the illumination from the moon, it was like one of those things where the hedge line created this really dark shadow over the fence line. Right. So our point guy, all you hear is this guy run into the fence and go boom, and he flips over the fence. He's got a 50-pound sandbag on his back, so he hits the ground, and he's like, oh, and that's all we heard, and we all ran up the fence line like, holy crap! But fortunately, we made it all over the fence before we got trampled. So that was pretty good. And then there was another time that we got to this obstacle course on Camp McCall. And the instructor was a World War II Ranger who apparently, the story goes, he had one dead eye. He looked like, this mean old grandpa off a bar stool from the VFW or something. And he had one dead eye. And apparently the story goes, he was a Ranger and he was on some, crazy secret mission. He was one of the only survivors. No one knew the real details about it, but that was the story. So this guy gets up on this sort of wall that's all blown out. They had this like obstacle course area that looks like, Beirut, Lebanon after. And he gets up on this wall. He's like, you guys think you're fucking tough. He's like, try and do this. And he runs across this cinder block wide wall that's about 15 feet off the ground. Like you and I are running across a parking lot. And we all just looked at each other like, where the hell did they dig this guy up?
Unreal.
So halfway across the wall, the guy in front of me freezes up. And you're right, because there are all sorts of characters that come through this course. And the guy that froze up in front of me was actually a very interesting character. I look down and he stops in front of me, so I have to stop. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Don't stop on this wall. You're going to freaking fall. And he goes, I'm afraid of heights. And I looked up and I remembered in the briefing, this dude was the captain of the Golden Knights jump team.
Wow.
So I said to him, you're afraid of heights? I was like, don't you have like 1 million jumps? He's like, yeah, over 1,600. But the reason why all the apparatuses at Fort Benning are roughly between 15 and 30 feet is because your mind knows that your body is in imminent danger if you fall from that height. I guess that's pretty true.
It's funny. We haven't even gotten to a deployment yet, and you've had this much experience. So let's turn forward to that. You were part of the Panama invasion.
Yep.
What was that like? What were you told? We've told that story a couple of times, not as often as we would have liked, nor Desert Storm for that matter. And you were through them both, so I'm excited to hear about it. But what were you told prior to going into Panama?
So we were on a routine shift with Panama because, again, using motion sensors for many, many years, they had them all along the canal to protect the canal zone. So we were replacing a team that was already down there. And you have to remember the thing about Panama, we had fixed bases all over the canal for many, many years. So we land on the ground in civilian clothing. And our POC down there greets us at the plane. They're like, are you guys from 2nd Surveillance Reconnaissance Intelligence Group? And we said, yes. And they said, wait here. And a 5-ton troop carrier came around the back of the plane, dropped the tailgate, and they're like, get your weapons, we're at war. So in the couple of days leading up to going down to Panama, Noriega had declared war on the United States. He had his PDF guys putting up roadblocks everywhere. And right before we headed down, there was an officer killed by one of the PDF guys at one of these roadblocks. And that's really what triggered the Panama invasion. So we got down there, got our weapons, and part of the briefing was, well, I got bad news and I have good news. The bad news is the surveillance team that you're replacing followed protocol and ripped everything out of the ground, so we don't have any surveillance equipment in the ground. But the good news is every Marine's a rifleman. So we ended up changing our mission, and we got mixed in with the infantry. So the interesting thing about the Panama invasion that most people don't know about is we had about 26,000 troops involved in the Panama invasion. About 6,000 paratroopers jumped into combat. We had the entire 82nd Airborne jumped in, the 75th Ranger Regiment jumped in, and it was the first time that all of the special ops units were in one place at one time since the Vietnam War. It was also the first time that the Apache gunship was used in combat, and it was the first time that anything stealth hit something in war. So the F-117 was actually used during the Panama invasion as well. So
Wow.
There was this gap between like Vietnam, and then we had the skirmish for Beirut, and then Panama was a few years later. But there's just sort of like the proving ground for all these modern toys that they developed over the years.
Did you actually see combat?
Yeah, so in Panama, we were mixed in with the infantry. We did take some direct fire from the Panamanian Defense Forces. One thing that you can consider with Panama, it's such a small area. It's like having a war in a small town. So the volume of fire was very intense. When the invasion kicked off, it was about 1 a.m, slightly illuminated night. You could see all of the cargo planes with the paratroopers jumping in from my position. And there was just tracers everywhere all at once. It was just like time to the second. Everything just opened up. So it was pretty intense fighting, particularly for the first 36 hours. And then, within a couple of weeks, things sort of died off. One of the things I vividly remember is I was stationed on Robin Naval Station, and they had these old like Quonset huts. I think they were probably built in like World War II. So they're like, the half circle shaped structures with steel roofs on them. Every day in Panama, it would pour rain, like torrential downpour for at least 10 minutes, which really sounded like nails hitting the roof. But we were on the same base next to the SEAL teams that were sent down there. And unfortunately, they were sent out to the airport to disable the plane, and 4 of them were killed. So one of my vivid memories of the Panama invasion was after the fighting was done, we were at the enlisted club on Robin Naval Station. And that song, Proud to Be an American, was huge back then.
Right.
So everyone was drinking up, having, sort of commemorating and thinking about all the people that fell during the Panama invasion. But when that song came on, everyone was standing on the tables, standing on the bar stools, and screaming that song at the top of their lungs. So it was a very memorable moment.
Yeah, powerful stuff to say the least. So Panama ends for you, and shortly thereafter, 1990, Saddam Hussein gets a little bit quirky, and next thing you know, we're in Desert Shield, Desert Storm. So what was your role in that?
Yeah, so I was actually very thankful. I was supposed to go to Greenland for winter combat training, and our ship got canceled for the war, and I was jumping up and down. So the only thing I heard about winter combat training was it's cool for a couple of days, and it's just like all white and frostbite for the months that follow. So our team was sent over to Desert Storm, and we had about 15 of our teams that were doing sensor deployments, because you have to remember, this is probably the last linear scale war there may ever be.
Yes.
Unless World War III happens and it's like a Mad Max scenario or something at the end of the world.
Well, and for those listening, when the non-military folks, linear warfare, meaning good guys on one side, bad guys on the other, and let's go fight this thing out. It's not the way we fight in combat anymore. Everybody's mixed in, and it's guerrilla warfare and things of that nature.
Absolutely. So when we were over there in Desert Storm, our teams were tasked to deploy these sensor fields along the front lines and forward of the front lines to make sure that enemy probes weren't coming in to see what was going on. So my particular team was tasked out to provide this type of forward security for an organization called Task Force Troy. So there were 6 OPs across the front lines, observation posts. So they went 1 through 6 from east to west, and 1 was on the Persian Gulf, but we were by the Al Wafra oil fields, and we were tasked with putting up pretty much the biggest movie set ever created. We were there to do psyops and make sure that Saddam Hussein thought that we were going to assault from the Gulf inwards, an amphibious assault. This allowed the 1st and 2nd Marine divisions to sweep up behind us and blitz up the middle through the minefields. So for about the week and a half before the ground invasion kicked off, we were out there putting up all these fake tanks, fake gun emplacements with PVC piping and camo netting. And then we also did things like drop leaflets out of helicopters with little cartoons on them saying we're about to decimate everything in this area in the next 12 hours. And then we rolled in with B-52s and actually did it. And then we put out more leaflets in helicopters saying we're going to be back in 12 hours. And that's when we saw a lot of white flags coming up. So
really,
yeah. So our primary mission was to make sure that while we had the skeleton crew out there making it look like we had a division out there, what we wanted to do was make sure that no enemy probes could get in and see what was going on.
how much was the PSYOP, psychological operations, or that part of the warfare, part of that the entire war, I guess? I mean, because one of the things I was thinking in asking you about this was, were you surprised at how little resistance that we met from the Iraqi army? I just remember I was young at the time. I was in grammar school, but it was one of those things where I just remember hearing about how quickly they gave up. The Iraqi forces quickly surrendered, and Norman Schwarzkopf was going like a hot knife through butter all the way through Saudi Arabia into Iraq and everything else. And so it was, I just was curious at the level of surrender that you saw.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big factor to that was that, again, this war was more run almost like a World War II type battlefield. So there was the buildup. We were sending troops over there from the summertime all the way up until like February. So it took that long to get 750,000 troops over there. We had a coalition of about 38 different countries as well.
Yeah.
And for about the month leading into the ground invasion, we just pummeled them with just sortie after sortie after sortie of bombs, just blowing up everything. So we really softened them up before we went in for the killer blow. We did take some artillery fire, particularly in our area, because we were doing things like calling very, very, very well-placed airstrikes and that type of thing. So we did take some artillery fire. However, once the ground offensive took place and they blasted through the minefields and charged up into Kuwait, we ended up linking up with the larger units because our mission was done. So I actually got up through the minefield. And one of the more hairy things that happened was this is about, just after 6 a.m, the sun had just risen. But Saddam Hussein, before they started, heading back to Iraq, they lit 200 oil wells on fire.
Yeah.
So all that smoke was in the air, and it shifted over the minefields. So you have to remember, a lot of these cuts that were made through the minefields are basically line charges, C4 that they just detonated and made instant pass for the vehicles to get through. So we were stuck in there for like an hour and a half when the smoke actually shifted over the oil fields. And it was one of those situations where you couldn't get out and dismount your vehicle because you're in the middle of a minefield.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Yeah, so that was pretty crazy. But we got to the Kuwait airport up there, and our commander wanted to regroup all of our teams. So the easiest way was to just say, everybody go to the airport. We linked up. We did bomb assessment of what happened for up there on the highway of death. And that was really quite a mess. So for those who don't know, Saddam Hussein didn't formally surrender. And he was pulling his troops out of Kuwait, heading north to Iraq again. And we just bombed the hell out of the column. And it was just pieces of vehicles and people everywhere. So it was really a really big mess.
How long were you there for?
So I went right after New Year's,
Okay.
and I was there until the later part of March, going into April.
Yeah, because I remember it only lasted like 10 weeks.
Yeah, it was the ground offensive was a 100-hour war, right?
Yeah.
So it was intense. You have to remember also that back then you had Norman Schwarzkopf and Colin Powell. I think a lot of the thought process back then was we're going to do it the right way. Those two in particular had lived through Vietnam, and they wanted to make sure that we were going to go in with overwhelming force with a coalition. And part of that coalition was built upon the fact that we agreed that we weren't going to oust Saddam Hussein or try and take over Iraq at the time. And that's what everything sort of hinged upon. So we did exactly that. We had an entry plan, an exit plan, and everything executed pretty flawlessly, I would say.
Yeah. The A lot to digest. Now, when you think back to, and it's funny you mentioned Schwarzkopf and Powell.
Yep.
I wonder, are generals back then better than the ones today, do you think? I mean, do you think their leadership was something that was unique?
I don't think it's that as much as the fact that warfare has changed.
Right.
So you hit the nail on the head. We've gone from linear scale warfare like that into guerrilla warfare. So
And urban operations.
It's basically you're comparing something that's like black and white, cut and dry, to something that only operates in the gray. So with guerrilla warfare, things are much more complex. You're living amongst the population. The variables are entirely different. So I would say that, you know, with the type of warfare like Desert Storm, you're probably going to have a higher probability of success as far as, you know, measuring what's now. You know, we've been at war for 17 years, but it's a different type of war. We're trying to win the hearts and minds of people, right? So I think that's more the goal. That's a much more long-term goal. One of the things I'm actually very thankful for, I've been a trader on the stock exchange for like 25 years. And one of my friends came up to me one day from JP Morgan a few years after the war. And I'd only been down, you know, on the floor as a junior clerk. And I said, yeah, sure. You know, bring your guests over. I'd love to meet them. So it was a guy and his son. And he said, I heard you were in Desert Storm as a Marine. I said, yeah. And he goes, I'd like to shake your hand. And I said, sure, why? And he said, I'm Kuwaiti. If you didn't rescue my country, my son here would never have been born. So, you know, next year, 2020 is actually going to be 30 years later after Desert Storm. One of the things that I'm very happy about is that Panama next year will be 30 years, is still at peace. And now a lot of people are actually retiring down there. And then the same thing's true with Kuwait. Kuwait, 30 years later, is surrounded by chaos, but the country is at peace.
It's amazing that I got chills when you said that. Now, I don't know if you believe in the collective tissue or, you know, the overarching power of the higher being, but think of what your dad had to go through to save you and to keep you intact. And in a way, you sort of return that favor in some small part to that Kuwaiti man whose son was born because you were part of that liberation.
Yeah, I'm just grateful to have been, you know, able to serve my country and do my job. I wasn't a hero. I just did what I signed up to do. And I was happy to play a small part. Years later, the same thing happened on the stock exchange. I met a guy and a girl in their 20s, and he was 5 and she was 2 when we rescued Kuwait. So I'm hoping that in the future, we're going to hear more and more stories about Iraq and Afghanistan that are going to be similar to this, because they're definitely out there.
No, they certainly are. You know, it's funny when you say that. I think of the experiences I had with the Iraqis that I work with day in and day out. I don't know if I'd ever recognize any of them unless there was a picture that I was shown from some of the guys that I trained side by side with every day. But that feeling has got to be something that's so rewarding. It's just hard to describe when someone expresses that sort of gratitude for the work that you did.
Absolutely.
All right, so 4 short years in the Marine Corps, you've jam-packed a ton into the whole thing, but yet you decide to hang it up. Why and how did it end?
So I was on a 5-man team. We mostly stuck together the whole time. But I had 3 guys on my team get married and divorced in the same hitch. And I just saw that the lifestyle that we led was very difficult to have a family. So my decision really was, do I stay in the military and keep on doing this? Because I really couldn't see doing any other type of job in the military. Or someday if I'm going to have a family, I should probably get out. So I took the latter. And at the time, you know, I had a lot of foresight because I was 21, right? But I thought it was probably best for me, you know, someday if that was my ambition, that I should follow that course. So I ended up getting out of the military, and most people were very shocked because I was super gung-ho at the time.
What did your parents say when you told them you were getting out?
I think they had a sigh of relief for sure. Especially when I walked through the door of the military 4 years earlier. They had no idea what was going to happen for the next 4 years. So having crammed all that into 4 years, I think they were very, very happy that I decided to get out.
You know, you said your mom was watching CNN 24 hours in a row during Desert Storm. Did you ever talk to her about what she went through and what her experience was like from her end?
Mom doesn't really like to talk about it. Just about the story of my dad and how he came in, sort of risked everything to save our family. So um, she's she's tried to sort of not forget, but not really talk about it as much. I mean, one thing that she's thankful for is once they got back to the United States in the late '70s, she was able to actually get one of her sisters. My mom's one of seven. She got one of her sisters out with her family. They escaped Vietnam because my parents arranged through the churches to actually get them a route out. So they were part of the boat people back in the late '70s.
But also, did she ever tell you about what she went through as your mother while you were in Desert Storm?
Oh, no, just I've just over and over repeatedly heard that they just didn't sleep the whole time. My dad, after work would come home, watch CNN, and then before going to work in the morning, and then some. So she and her family were very close knit, and they were, my entire family at the time was pretty much watching and communicating amongst each other. So
I wonder if that's worse than what we go through. Like it's in a certain way, I almost feel like, whatever fear you have in combat and whatever emotions you have, you learn to process and deal with very quickly and discard, and you just move on. And eventually it becomes so routine that it doesn't even feel like much of fear anymore or apprehension or whatever. But on the other side, for our family members, our parents, our siblings, loved ones, whatever it may be, sitting back every day and watching the news, or every time the phone would ring, do you jump? Does your heart skip a beat? Like, I wonder which side would be worse. I think that side would be worse.
Yeah, I definitely think that back then people were much more hypersensitive to it, especially since with Desert Storm, when the ground war went on. I think everyone in America was watching CNN or watching the news reports at that point in time. The one interesting thing about Desert Storm that I think will also never happen again is there was a media blackout once we actually went in on the ground offensive. So I don't ever see that happening again.
No, not by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, that won't happen.
Yeah.
All right, so you get out of the Marines. Did you know what you wanted to do next? I know you had mentioned, obviously, as you tipped that you're a trader on the stock floor of the New York Stock Exchange, but did you know that's what you wanted to do? How did that come about?
Yeah, so I was home on leave from Joint Task Force 6, and I was I grew up in Westfield, New Jersey, which is a Wall Street suburb. So when I went in the military, most of my friends were on the street in some way, shape, or form. So one of my friends was a broker clerk on the trading floor, and he rang me up because he knew I was home, and he said, "Why don't you come down to the trading floor of the NYC and check it out?" So I'm thinking back, this is around the time of the first Wall Street movie with Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen. So chaos, pandemonium, people yelling. I was like, this is perfect. Yeah, so I'll come check that out. So I get down there, and sure enough, his boss was a Vietnam veteran. Introduces himself, and then right when you open the doors to get into the trading floor, it's just an overwhelming, almost like concussive blast of noise from all the yelling down there. To actually have a conversation with a person standing next to you back then, you'd have to scream at each other. So 5,400 traders on the trading floor, total sort of electricity in the air, because you knew how much risk was going on and how many millions of dollars were made and lost, at every second of the day. So it was an environment that I sort of just looked at. I was like, this is freaking incredible. And I hit it off with his boss. So we stayed in touch when I actually went back to the base. And he asked me what I was going to do when I got out. And I said, honestly, I have no idea. I just always knew ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be in the military. But from there on, I'm not so sure. So he ended up getting me my first job with the largest market making firm down there called Spear Leeds and Kellogg. And I remember the first day I entered the building, and he said, well, you are going to be the most junior clerk at the largest firm on the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Whatever happens from here is up to you. So,
wow.
The first 6 months, I got to tell you, the first 6 months really sucked. So the funny thing was, everyone sort of gets put through the ringer their first 6 months on the New York Stock Exchange. Back then, highly competitive. Most people didn't make it past the first year. They really just put you through the ringer, have you doing all these manual, menial tasks. to just see if you had what it takes to actually stay there, and if you were worth investing the time and effort to train. So everything was an apprenticeship back then. I didn't go to college. I got in. They saw my background was intelligence, so they figured I had half a brain. They gave me a test where basically it was like a speed math test that I did pretty well on, and they gave me a shot. So after 6 months of like grabbing people's lunches and doing all that kind of thing, I remember just thinking to myself, man, this sucks. What the hell did I get myself into? I was in the military. I had a great job. I had a meaningful job that I felt like I was contributing to a greater good. And here it's like, I'm the low man of the totem pole, and I'm grabbing lunches for everybody. What's going to come of this? And then I remember at that point thinking to myself, maybe I have a chip on my shoulder because I built myself up in the military. I'm in a new world here. The only thing that I'm owed is some sort of an opportunity. And from there on, it's really up to me. But having been a corporal in the Marine Corps, this is one of the only jobs in the world where I could walk away from this and be a millionaire. Like the sky is the limit.
Right.
So then I just thought to myself, for the next 6 months, I'm not a quitter. So it's been 6 months. I'm going to give it another 6 months. And if they want me to grab lunch, I'm going to be the best lunch getter ever on the New York Stock Exchange. And I'm going to actually volunteer to do everything I can. And in 6 months from here, if I still think this way, at least I can walk away and say, I gave it a year. I gave it a shot. It just wasn't for me. And that's when everything changed, because everyone saw my attitude was that I will do anything. And that's when the opportunities came. So eventually I became an arbitrage trader. I was a managing director and a partner with a firm down there. So it was all just hard work and effort. Every inch that I gained, I fought for.
Well, I mean, listen, you didn't learn that anywhere other than in the Marine Corps. So from that standpoint, you translated what you learned very well.
Absolutely. And I was very grateful that later on, when I was in a position to do so, I was able to start engaging with the military. And we had an apprenticeship program for veterans trying to get jobs on Wall Street. And I was a mentor for that. And then we started doing care package drives once these wars lit up. And then from there, I just started volunteering with all different sorts of veteran service organizations in New York. So I'm currently a member of, I run the United War Veterans Council, but I'm a leader of 7 other organizations as a volunteer.
Well, that takes me to our next point. Again, you founded the United War Veterans Council, the Health and Wellness Program. What is that? Why'd you start it? And what does it do right now?
Yeah, so the Health and Wellness Program really started through a series of connections I'd made over the years. So in 2016, I did a 1,000-mile ruck march for post-traumatic stress suicide awareness. So I lost one of my team members that I served with in Desert Storm and went to SEAL school with. He went back twice as a civilian contractor to Operation Iraqi Freedom, took his own life in 2010. So man. I took up this 1,000-mile challenge with 950 other people. But then my twist on it was I'm going to spread awareness. I was with Team Red, White, and Blue. And it's one of our sort of things that we do is we run with a big American flag in these red shirts.
Yep.
So I started carrying the American flag for 1,000 miles, logging my miles on GPS. And through that, I started meeting a whole bunch of people. And they told me their stories of having been veterans or whatever it was. But by coincidence, and it's 5 below with the wind chill factor. I'm in the hills here on the Jersey coast. And I meet this couple who's trucking along. It's -5 out. And I'm out there with my ruck on. I was carrying like a 50-pound ruck load. And this woman sort of charges up to me because she sees I'm wearing like a military top. And she goes, "Are you a veteran?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "I have a farm that I want to dedicate to veterans suffering with PTS. We have 6 horses and we're going to open up in the spring. Can you help me?" So I was like, boy, did you meet the right person. So at this time, I actually was going through traditional therapy through the VA for post-traumatic stress. So I ended up being the guinea pig and going through the equine farm. I helped them get the farm in shape and help them clear the trails and that kind of thing. But I was the first one to actually go through their therapy. And from there, I started meeting other people. I met this awesome organization. This one was called Serenity Stables. So that's the one we go to every week. And another one that we connected to was Sail Ahead, and they do sailing for veterans out in Long Island. So this incredible family came from France. And two teenage sons came up with the idea, and they said, we've been sailing all of our lives, the calm of the ocean, using the wind and teamwork. I think would be beneficial for veterans suffering with PTS, because normally where they don't want to communicate, now they'll have to work as a team to operate the sails, to steer the ship, and to make it move. And if they don't know anything about sailing, we could have half the boat know how to sail and half the boat be the veterans. So the dad said, that's a great idea. Why don't we pitch this to the yacht club captains? And they pitched it to them. And they said, who will lend us your boats? Because we need boats. And everyone raised their hand. So these are the types of relationships I started building. And then later, when I went from volunteer to vice president to executive director of the United War Veterans Council over a 4-year period, I got to a place where I could finally stand something up. So I'd already been rucking through this 1,000-mile challenge, and I knew the people at Go Ruck. So that's where it started. I asked Jason McCarthy, Go Ruck is this team building sort of endurance events that are held around the country. And it was started by a Green Beret veteran. So I went through one of their leadership courses, met him, and I circled back and said, Jason, I want to start taking at-risk veterans rucking, hiking as a form of social fitness. So I started a partnership with an organization in New York City called Samaritan Daytop Village. They have 2 facilities for at-risk veterans. One's in Times Square, one's in Queens. They each house about 45 male veterans. These veterans are suffering from a multitude of issues, from post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, addiction problems, homelessness, and some have been in and out of jail. Some have been all of it. And through that, that's where the veterans actually come from. So we have them come out to the Jersey coast for the most part, unless we're at Long Island, and they engage in now rucking, hiking, and then we also do the equine therapy every week, sailing in the summers, and we have an art studio here in Red Bank. Another coincidence, the art studio was started by a former trader that was at the same firm that I was at years ago.
Wow.
I didn't find that out until after I was sending vets there already.
Oh, wow.
So I'm really happy to say that in about a year and a half, we've had over 1,000 veteran interactions through the program, and the community's really started to embrace it. So like my favorite pizza joint buys us lunch like every time we come out, because they know it's veterans that they're helping. John Bon Jovi, the rock singer, has a restaurant in town that was created for people who can't afford meals. So you can volunteer and work for food. There's no prices on the menu, so regular customers come in and donate to the cause to keep it going. So what I do is
amazing.
Our typical day is we end up going rucking. We go to the farm. We'll go do art therapy at the art studio, and then we end the day and we volunteer for like an hour and a half at John Bon Jovi's restaurant called Soul Kitchen, and then we all eat together. And the reason why we do it on Wednesdays is most people don't know this. John Bon Jovi's mom and dad were both Marine veterans. That's how they met.
Wow.
So his dad volunteers to cook once a week. It's on Wednesdays. So he wants the veterans there when he cooks, so he could actually come out, cook for them, and engage with them. So it's been pretty amazing. But I think it's equally as important as the fact that the community has gotten involved in this almost as much as the therapy aspect of what we do. Simply because I've had these veterans that have been through hell and back. I mean, some of them are dealing with all these issues. And I hear it over and over. They say to me, it really restores my faith in humanity, knowing that someplace like Soul Kitchen exists, or knowing that like our favorite pizza joint buys us lunch like every week. It's just incredible kindness. And to them, it means everything.
I've said this for a while now, and people will come up to me, as as listeners to this podcast know, I'm a lieutenant colonel, been in for 19 years, still going strong. But, I've been doing this podcast for over a year now, actually coming up on 2 years now. And everybody we talk to in the veterans community, somebody's affiliated with an organization, whether it's one they started or one that they work with, so on and so forth. There's so many veterans organizations out there. And I've always said to everybody, I said, I really wish that we could consolidate all these veterans organizations into a couple of big ones, because, hey, it's a principle of war, right? Economy of force and unity of effort is what we talk about. But we have so many of these veterans organizations out there all fighting for the same piece of the pie. And the reason why they all exist is for one simple premise. Because what we have learned is that as people who have chosen a life of service and put on a uniform, nobody really can help us when we get back. So we do the one thing that we know how to do best, and that's take care of each other. And that's why all these veterans organizations exist, because veterans know how to take care of each other, because that's all we know is the person to the left of you and the person to the right of you. And without that person to the left and the person to the right, you're probably not alive. And that's why all these organizations exist and how we take care of each other, because we're all so willing just to put our arm around somebody who did what we did and say, hey, man, I'm with you.
Absolutely. That's very well said. And what we are seeing, though, over the course of the last couple of years, especially, with the wars sort of winding down or evolving as they have, is that there's going to be probably more consolidation of veteran service organizations across the country. I mean, now there's like over 40,000 of them. So, I think that there definitely should be more collaborative efforts, which is basically what we've done with our health and wellness program. If you're helping veterans, it shouldn't be a competition. Everyone should
right.
be,
That's the point.
helping each other out. Yep.
Hey, real
Absolutely.
quick, Mark, tell me about the New York City Veterans Day Parade. You guys helped put that on. Largest Veterans Day Parade in the country, always held on November 11th, which actually is Veterans Day. How did that whole thing come about? How long has it been going on?
Oh, it's been going on for quite a long time, but the relevance for sort of our iteration of the United War Veterans Council and the Veterans Day Parade, probably the landmark date was 1985. So Vince McGowan was the president at the time. The American Legion used to run the parade. They sort of gave it up. And Vince McGowan was a Vietnam veteran. He served in special operations in Vietnam. And he said, we're not going to have it. There has to be a Veterans Day Parade. So he and a handful of Vietnam veterans took up the helm. They resurrected the charter for the United War Veterans Council, and they began the process of rebuilding the parade. 1985 was a small handful of them, and now it's built all the way up to through the years. Now we have over 25,000 marchers. It is the largest Veterans Day Parade in the country every year. So we are proud to what we do is, it's a parade, but it's also acting as the largest reunion for veterans every year. So veterans of every generation, we have veterans going back to World War II, Korea, Vietnam, all the little skirmishes like Panama, Beirut, Desert Storm, and then of course post 9/11 GWOT. So it's an incredible atmosphere to see. We run it on Fifth Avenue. It starts right in front of the Flatiron Building, and it goes all the way up to St. Pat's Cathedral. So it is incredible to see. We have an opening ceremony before the parade. So this year, the opening ceremony will start from 10 to 11 on 25th and 5th at Madison Square Park. There's an eternal light flagstaff, which is a giant flagpole that dates back to the beginning of the parade. So this year, the Army is the featured service branch. Our Grand Marshal is Florent Groberg, Flo Groberg, Army veteran,
Yep.
Medal of Honor recipient, Afghanistan. One of our marshals is Jason McCarthy, founder of GORUCK, Green Beret veteran. Another marshal that we have is Mike Irwin, who is the founder of Team Red, White, and Blue. He's also a multiple tour veteran of the Army, and he still is a lieutenant colonel
and a former Hazard Ground podcast guest. So if you're interested in that
That's
episode,
right.
Go back. Shameless plug. There you go.
And then we have Joe Mashariki, who actually started Black Vets of Social Justice, which has done a lot of great work in the community as well. So we have quite a lineup, and we also have in our executive contingent is American Humane. So American Humane has rescued over 1 billion animals around the world, and they are celebrating their centennial of working with the military. So they started with World War I war horses. And now they have a couple of components that help both with active military and veterans. So they take unwanted animals, they rehabilitate them, and they train them to be service dogs that are sent overseas. So other dogs that they have, they rehabilitate them, and they turn them into therapy dogs for veterans. And the third phase that they do is really special. If a veteran served overseas with a dog and they want to adopt that dog, it's a really, really difficult process, but
Yeah.
That's another thing that they actually help with as well.
Wow, that's incredible. Well,
Yeah.
obviously, I mean, everybody knows about it because we see it on the news and things of that nature. But when you get to the inner workings of the parade, it's it's impressive to say the least that you've put that many forces together all on the same page to be able to put together an event that honors everybody's service and what they have done. And certainly your efforts don't go unnoticed every single year, but it's just incredible everything that you've been able to do over the course of not only your military career but your post-military career. Probably maybe in certain cases is more impressive.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate it. I'm just playing my part and trying to help our fellow veterans out there.
Well, again, Mark, I mean, listen, the 4 years in the Marine Corps, jam-packed. What you have done afterwards certainly is still having an impact today on veterans everywhere, not only in the New York City area, but all over the country. And the tentacles and the reach that you have is incredible, and we certainly appreciate all the efforts that you have put forth. And it's going strong, and I'm proud of you, brother. I mean, it's just a great job.
Thanks so much, and I really appreciate you having me on board. It's been a delight to talk to you. I'm sorry if I rambled on a bit much, but I get very excited about talking about these types of things.
No,
if you
certainly.
want to learn anything else about the parade, you can go to uwvc.org. So if you want to be a volunteer or support the parade in any way, you can just follow it through our website. And
it's uwvc.org again. If you want to donate or be a part of it, that's just amazing stuff. And I certainly think that in the future, you'll have a lot of the Hazard Ground community support going forward. So, Mark Otto, it has been a pleasure. Congratulations on all your success, both with the service and in your regular life and everything you do in post-career. So we certainly appreciate you joining us on the Hazard Ground.
Thank you very much. Semper Fidelis.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.